This is the Oberheim Xpander from 1984, and that's a really interesting period in the Oberheim story because in the mid-70s they'd done the SEM-based synthesizers, which everybody lusts after. Into the late 70s and early 80s they'd started the poly muscle synths, which everybody lusts after. But now technology was changing, and it was changing at a rate of knots, and it didn't matter who you were or what you'd done in the past. You were going to have to come out with new products if you were going to stay in the game. Meanwhile, a teenager called Marcus Ryle had saved up his pennies to buy his first ever synthesizer, a second-hand Art Odyssey, for $600. And as well as using it to make music, he then started opening it up and looking at the circuits and figuring out how it worked. And over the coming years, he started dabbling with modifying synthesizers. Specifically, he took the speaker out of a 2600 and put a sequencer in its place, for example. Now, Marcus's parents encouraged him to channel this into something, and as luck would have it, Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, which was in the vicinity of where Marcus lived, had invested in a synthesizer lab and a recording studio. And Marcus went and checked this out and subsequently wound up teaching electronic music and music production at Cal State, despite still only being a teenager at the time. Now, Cal State subsequently acquired one of only a handful of the original Synclavier systems, what we'd now call the Synclavier 1. And true to form, Marcus not only figured out how to use it, but started figuring out how it actually worked. They then got a phone call from a gentleman who wanted to come down to see this intriguing new bit of technology. And he turned up, and Marcus showed him through it and showed him how it worked. And this gentleman was impressed enough to later phone Marcus to offer him a job. And this gentleman was, of course, Tom Oberheim. So Marcus joins Oberheim, and initially he's involved with some products that are already in development. But the first product that he is tasked with designing himself from scratch is the DSX digital sequencer, which formed part of the Oberheim system. And this allowed you to sequence the voices of your OBX-A or subsequently OB8, while simultaneously synchronizing a DMX or DX drum machine, which was a big deal at the time because MIDI wasn't out yet. Now, the Oberheim system was a success and was used by some really big-name artists, things as diverse as the Police's Synchronicity album through to Brad Feidel's soundtrack for The Terminator. And so this gave Marcus and a fellow engineer, Michel Doidic, the currency to go to Tom Oberheim and propose a new synthesizer. And Tom agreed. And so they took some of the analog technology from the OBXA and the OB8, combined it with digital control and put it in what was an expander module, kind of following on from what the SEMs originally were. They are expander modules. And that prototype was called the OB Xpander. They made one. It now resides at EMIAP, still exists, which is cool. And that was, of course, the direct predecessor to the production Xpander. So, was ist der Xpander? I hear you cry. Well, I'll tell you, my German friends. It is a hybrid of analog and digital technology. There's voltage-controlled oscillators, 2 per voice, voltage-controlled filters, and voltage-controlled amps. And those are SEM chips, or Curtis Electromusic chips. And Doug Curtis didn't just provide the chips, he was actually involved with the development of the Xpander because the Oberheim guys wanted to customize the implementation of those chips in the Xpander. Specifically, they wanted to alter the ways that you could use the filter and the filter modes. And sure enough, there are 15 different filter modes on the Xpander, which is pretty incredible for the time. You then get all the digital stuff. 5 digitally generated envelope generators per voice, 5 digitally generated LFOs per voice, ramp generators, tracking generators, Eff Em, I wonder why they included that, lag processing, and then the ability to configure how those control signals interact with the audio path. So it's kind of like a modular synth, but without the patch cables. Not a big deal nowadays, but this was 38 years ago. Now, things are about to get a little bit arousing because so far I've only been showing you single patches, but there's actually a multi-patch mode on the Xpander where you can load a completely different patch on each of the 6 voices. Then you can decide whether they are controlled by a zone, a MIDI channel, or any one of the 6 CV and gate inputs. And as well as being able to route them to the stereo outputs and set the panning, you can also send them to the direct out and the 6 of those. So you can run this as 6 completely independent synthesizers. So here's 6 sounds I've set up. So a synth drum patch for kicks and toms. A snare patch. And a chirpy, hi-hatty / marimba-y sound. A DX style bass. A kind of atmospheric sustained sound. And an effect which I've called arcade. Let's hear them all together. So that worked. So let's do another one where we run the individual outputs through some different effects. So the Xpander comes out in 1984. A year later, they put two Xpanders and a keyboard together in one box and come out with the Matrix 12. The mind boggles as to what you could do with that. But unfortunately, Oberheim were in big financial trouble by that point and they went bankrupt. They were bought and managed to start back up again for a couple of years, during which time they came out with the Matrix 6 and the Matrix 6R, which are way simpler, way cheaper, but are related to the Xpander and Matrix 12 technology. But unfortunately, they then went bankrupt again. Tom Oberheim left. Michel, Doidic and Marcus Ryle had already left and gone on to do some very significant things that we haven't got time to even begin talking about now, maybe some other time. And then Gibson come out with the Oberheim Matrix 1000, which is a popular product, but as far as I can tell, has nothing to do with the Oberheim guys by that point. So that's really the end of the trail for this story. Whilst it did have some famous users at the time, Vince Clarke, Jeff Downes, Steve Porcaro.
I'll assign it to the Oberheim Xpander.
Daniel Miller. I personally associate the Xpander with music a good decade or so later. 9 Inch Nails, The Chemical Brothers, Meat Beat Manifesto, Orbital. Paul Hartnell is a wizard with the Xpander. Alan Brax and Sasha, who not only used an Xpander but has a song and EP called Xpander, which is a tribute to this instrument. If you combine it with the fact that the interface is so familiar, eerily familiar if you've used a ASM Hydra synth or a Prophet Rev 2 or any number of modern synths, it's a very interesting product. I think it's a little bit out of time perhaps, and that's probably why they're getting more and more expensive now as people kind of latch on to what they did and what they can do. Huge thank you to the owner of this instrument, and thank you for watching.